Welcome to the Get Trauma Informed podcast, dedicated to unraveling the complexities of trauma, its pervasive impact, and the journey towards holistic recovery and realignment. If your radiance has ever felt muted, like I and thousands of others, you're in the right place to reignite your inner light. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Get Trauma Informed podcast. And I tell you, you're in for such an amazing treat today. I have with me Mike Shooty. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Really excited
Oh,
about being here.
I appreciate you being on. I mean, you bring so much to the trauma awareness and trauma informed. You bring so much to the community. So you are a certified family recovery coach and or specialist, and also
hmm
a published author. I'm going to bounce the
Yes.
ball in your court if you want to expand on that just a little bit, so we know who we have here dropping all
Yeah.
these amazing nuggets today.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, I'm an author of the book called Lost in London, A Journey from Insanity to Acceptance. And this book is really about my vulnerability, being honest, and I utilized recovery as a platform. And it journals kind of a 20-year run of my substance use disorders and all the things that I had to do to try to get back to the place of freedom. And so, yeah, then, and also, as you've mentioned, I'm also a certified recovery coach, and I do work with individuals, men specifically, to help them in their recovery journey.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
applaud you for that, for working with the male demographic, because sometimes that's very, very challenging because, I mean, there's so many reasons why it's challenging, but, men are always taught to, suck it up and, just plow through it versus working through it. So I definitely applaud you for that.
Yeah.
The one question that we start our podcast off with is, what does get trauma informed mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really means about addressing these issues that, that I probably didn't address very well as I kind of went through my journey. And that's really the effects of trauma and the uniqueness of trauma in our lives. And how that can cement and turn us into different directions in our lives. So that's what it means to me, is really to start to uncover some of those pieces, and yeah, your program provides a lot of that helpful information.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for that.
sure.
So I actually want to turn everything into just talking a little bit about your story. I think it's so interesting, the title of your book, From Insanity to Awareness, and that just summed it all up, because
Mm,
that's what it is when you're on that cycle of addiction. It is a insanity to awareness, because oftentimes we are not aware of the trauma that is deep seated inside of us, and we all know that when you don't address the trauma, because trauma is so progressive, it is
yeah,
going to rear its ugly head eventually. We can
right.
suppress it for only so long. So you can talk a
Yeah.
little bit about, I mean, you said it came from your journey, but well, how did you come up with that title? And tell us a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, from insanity to acceptance, because my journey over a 20-year run of substance use disorders was complete insanity, right? And I had to finally come to that acceptance of of the disease of addiction. And not just that, I had to really do a lot of work. And one of the big things that I do every day is understanding the different traumas that had happened to me throughout my life, and how that kind of pushed me into a different direction. And so, like I said, that I thought that was a very important piece when say, journey from insanity to acceptance, is because that was some very dark times for me, very dark, things that have happened to me over this 20-year journey. And it's, but one of the pieces that I write about in this book is, I had met somebody and he talked to me about the uniqueness of traumas in our lives, that we couldn't compare traumas to anybody else's. So it's not it's so unique to you. And what happens is, they just push you into a different direction and the perception of yourself and how you see yourself in the world. And once I started to uncover some of those things and these, now it and now I have the opportunity to try to change some of those behaviors where before I would those thoughts would circle through my head for days and days. Now I can recognize that they still come to me, Liz, but they also they don't come as often, and I have solutions and can change my behaviors to try to move those thoughts and to change those behaviors. Does that
I
make
love
sense?
that. I love that. I love the fact that you said point touched on two very very key factors. You talked about how you see yourself in the world and those tapes
Yeah,
that run in your head. And what
yeah,
we talk about often in our classes and on the podcast is that when trauma has happened, and you also touched on trauma after trauma after trauma, which I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and up until my I want to say early 50s, I didn't understand it. I just knew that life was not working out, and the decisions that I would make just did not
yeah,
get me the result or resolve that I thought it would get me. But what I learned and come to understand as I've gone through becoming certified in trauma is that when you have suffered that type of trauma, life is you're looking at life through a trauma lens, right? So the perspective is skewed. And even how you
right,
see yourself, no matter what people tell you about yourself, how great you are, or how amazing you are, I mean, you have a fantastic voice. We don't even hear those type of things when we are looking from the trauma perspective. And that's how life is like, it's off balance until you come into that awareness, like you said, from
yeah,
insanity to awareness. That's exactly, I mean, you hit it straight on the head with that. Um,
right,
and how we see ourselves in the world. That's a big point. And then that complex PTSD when we don't even know it's there. I mean, I share my story of wound trauma. I had trauma from the wound and trauma all through my life. So, of
yeah,
course, I didn't understand as a child, a toddler, or infant, but coming from
yeah,
domestic violence and going into domestic violence in my adult life, I didn't understand that. And now I
right,
understand that it's important that we bring this awareness. That's why I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story with us today.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that, when I'm working with guys and coaching individuals, it's really, the first question is, how can we support you? The second question is, we need to start understanding why. Why do you kind of continue to try to escape from your life? Why do you continue to hide? And once we start to uncover those things, like I said, we have the opportunity to start looking at healthier behaviors moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Yeah,
love that. Because becoming aware of it and then having the tools in your toolkit. Because, oftentimes when you're sitting there in that trauma, you don't have the tools, so you don't know how to manage it. You're only utilizing your own frame of reference
right.
and that's what you said about that cycle of addiction. You keep getting on that same cycle over and over again. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
more about that in your story as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that as I said, my story was that I was kind of a repeat relapser. I would go and I would get sober for 3 or 4 years, and then I would move into a different direction, and then I'd pick up a drink, and I was off again, and I did that. So I didn't really understand it. I didn't really understand that because being sober is really about getting the chemicals out of your body, and you can do that, and it takes 4 or 5 days or to get those chemicals out of your body. You are technically sober, and I lived sober for years at a time. But when things started to change for me is when I got into sobriety, when I actually started to do the work and uncover some of these behaviors. It was really identifying some of these character defects that I had brought in since as a child, and I was still repeating that. And so there's a big difference between being sober and living in sobriety. And sobriety really is about really uncovering some of those things that has pushed your behavior in this way. And for me, once I started to identify those things, I started to live in a different world of sobriety and recovery. And there's a big difference there.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said once you became aware of it, and then you're able. That's something we talk about too about relapse prevention. because oftentimes we think that, we've suffered this trauma. Okay, now I'm good now. However, there's continued work that we must continue to do, like self-care, not overwhelming ourselves. Again, not running into those habits of covering or anesthetizing the pain from whatever challenge or situation in life. We talked a little
Yeah.
bit about building that. We talked about resilience, building that
Yeah.
resilient part of yourself, all of that. And then also isolation too. I think that was one of my things. Isolation was kryptonite for me because I
Yeah.
only had my own frame of reference to deal with. I didn't have any coaches or support, yeah. So that's absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like trauma, like you just mentioned something, just, trauma and substance use disorders are very similar, right? They're very sneaky. We hide it, we isolate it, and until one day it kind of blows up, right? So
Absolutely.
there's that um, equal kind of trauma and substance use disorders, and then kind of we suffer in shame in some of those things. So trauma is kind of hand in hand, and then the things that I have to work with and deal now is when I was actively in my addiction and in my substance use disorders, I affected a lot of people around me, right? And that is like now they have their trauma for some of the things that had transpired, right? So it's kind of that what happens is that addiction is trauma, right? It's
Absolutely.
trauma for everybody around us. So
Absolutely. It is the cycle of addiction. And that's what I had to really, as I was studying through, how addiction and how emotional, the trauma, all of it's on that cycle of addiction because we follow the same patterns, right? Until we become aware of what's going on with us, we continue to, maybe we have whatever the challenge is, then we cover it up with whatever unhealthy habit, whether it's sex or whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's gaming, anything in excess, anything to stuff that emotion, that big emotion, right? And then we go
yeah,
around that cycle because we get to the point of remorse and we say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing it anymore. And then we go back around that whole cycle again, the physical obsession, I mean, the mental obsession and the physical compulsion. And, we go around and around that cycle. So it is that the trauma and
yeah,
addiction and all of
yeah,
those things, those all go hand in hand. And when we
yeah,
educate ourselves even more for it and have the support around us that's supporting us and not enabling us, that our loved ones enable us because they don't know. And then we
right.
traumatize them. So it's a vicious cycle back and forth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, there's that shame and that one of the things is we're trying to soothe that pain, right? Somehow. And as you
Yes.
just mentioned, the outcomes of that, how we soothe it. I mean, for mine was, drinking, right? I soothed it. It stopped the noise, it stopped the pain until, it destroys you,
Yes.
and right. So it's just like you mentioned, Liz, it's that cycle that we have a tendency to move towards.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I love that, and I would go back to this point of w- why you want to escape your life is something that you mentioned earlier, and having us to understand that that's what it is. Where we're trying to escape something when we go into those unhealthy habits, and the thing of it is that there is a way to recover from that. But the first step is to become aware that there is a challenge, there is an issue.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Imagine driving down the road, enjoying a beautiful day when suddenly a tree jumps out in front of your car. Crash! In an instant, your life is flipped upside down, both physically and psychologically. That was my reality. I'm Liz Blanding, a certified holistic wellness and trauma recovery coach. In a time when, according to the National Center for PTSD, the epidemic of trauma is on the rise, 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives. That's 223.4 million people who could benefit from support on their journey to recovery. To address this, I launched the Get Trauma Informed podcast in March 2024. Our podcast offers free information, resources, expert advice, and stories of those who have overcome trauma and shifted from surviving to thriving. The podcast has the capacity to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I believe that by partnering with the Get Trauma Informed podcast, we can provide critical support to many more people who need it. Trauma was not their fault, but recovery is their responsibility. And with your support, we can help them to achieve it. Thank you for considering the partnership opportunity. I look forward to the possibility of working together to make a significant impact on trauma recovery. Email us at info@oasiswellnessctrs.com or contact us at 616-320-0703. Now we will return to our Get Trauma Informed conversation.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and that's one of the things that I struggled with because I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware until I really started to dig and understand that. And like I said, my traumas weren't really huge things; they were very small things that happened to me, embarrassments when I was in my adolescence that I just carried through my adult life. And by chance, at 15, 16 years old, I found alcohol, and those voices went away from me.
No.
Right. So,
yes. Yeah. And for me, you could become another person, uninhibited. You just, you don't care. It's kind of like when you go to the dentist and they give you laughing gas, right? It's like, well, I don't care anymore, and you want to go back to that. I don't care anymore. But how productive can you be in that state of, I just don't care anymore, And then, so fulfilling our purpose calls for us to go through trauma recovery and like you said, recovery from addictions, and then being aware that we do have choices. I talked about it earlier today. I talked about chocolate or vanilla. You choose. You're going to have a different experience, right? And also we talked a little bit about there's a difference between therapy and coaching, and a lot of people do resonate with the coaching message. A lot of people resonate with both because, and I work with some veterans that talk about that they didn't know that there was the services like yourself and like our offer. They didn't know those services were available. And that's another pointer that we point out in the Get Trauma Informed podcast is that you have choices,
Yeah. Well, and I mean the big thing for me when I'm talking to somebody, an individual that may be struggling, and we really focus on mind, body, and soul, right? So, it's really kind of understanding those behaviors as we just talked about with the trauma things and all these things that have gone on in your life. And then we really, we start to focus on some of the, the body pieces of it, right? These areas of, deficiencies. What we see a lot of individuals that are coming in who, have gone through the chaos of substance use disorder, and they've gone through, rehab where they start to feel better, and they need to continue to change those behaviors and change those habits. And that could be a nutrition piece, that could be working out. Got people that come out of there, start to change those things. And then, the soul piece of that spiritual connection, right? And I tell anybody, I don't really, whatever spiritual connection you have in your world is great, but you have to have something in your life. Mm-hmm. It just can't be you. I mean, I see guys that, go to church and stay recovered. And I see guys going to the gym and, meeting guys and working out with them, and they have those connections. So it really has to be focused on that mind, body, and soul. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that I really help individuals with, and trying to connect those pieces together, because the more that we have in those buckets, mm-hmm. the better off we're going to be in society, the better off that we're going to, be the person that we want to be, and be that healthy person, and be there for our families, and be productive, and all those things. So it's those changes. They don't happen overnight, but those are the three core areas that I try to talk to individuals about, right? Yeah. And creating that balance.
Absolutely. We go mind, body, spirit, and soul. So we're in the same vein here. We also teach on the fragmentation of the soul. When you hit a trauma, you fragment. So you're not 100% of who you are intended to be. So when you fragment at whatever age it is, so you have a huge trauma that happens, part of you is stuck in that trauma until you actually do the work to recover it. And so I had
Yes.
to, in my experience, I had to come back, mind, body, spirit, and soul, to bring it all back together because I was still fragmented. So what it means is that if you have one bout of trauma, maybe 30% of you are stuck in that trauma and 70% is ongoing in the world. Well, in my case, it was trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. So if I really were to add the numbers up, I was kind of functioning on about 40% of who I truly am and who I was
Yeah.
truly meant to be. And when I
Yeah.
bring those pieces together and talk about how when you bring all those pieces together, you come off of the stress response of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You're not always in that anxietous position making decisions out of fear. You're now in a different mode. So yeah, I love that piece about mind, body, spirit, and soul. I love that, or mind, body, and spirit, like you said. But teaching, I think leading with education and helping us all to become aware. Hence why the Get Trauma Informed podcast was born, so that we can spread the word and people can
Yeah.
hear it, not just my perspective, but your perspective and others
Right.
that have overcome trauma. They can relate to that. That's why we wrote the Pathway to Trauma Recovery book with 13 different authors in it, because all of
Hmm.
their different voices and perspective resonate with somebody else.
Right. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah. Good
love
stuff.
it. I,
Yeah.
I just I love when we get into these
It's great.
trauma informed conversations because I learn something every time I sit down with an expert. And experts are folks that have overcome, and then we come
Yeah.
back and we want to give more. But
Yeah.
I'm stuck on the insanity to awareness. I'm stuck on the title of your book. It just resonated with me.
Yeah.
It's that whole journey.
Yeah, it has been. I mean, I like I said, I just released this book, probably like 5 months ago or so, and it's just the people that have reached out to me has been amazing. So, I didn't even listen. I didn't even know that I could write well, right? And it was something that I've worked on for the last 3 years, and I spent a lot of time going through it. And when I started writing this book, I thought this was, like I said, a solitary mission, and I was going to figure out all my stuff and everything was going to work out. But I realized halfway through it, it was a story about us. And portions of my book is going back to supporting local recovery centers. So that's a really important piece to me. But yeah, it's been a wonderful journey. And one of the things that I talk about is in this book is that kind of near the end, I said, I've kind of shared you all my raw, like stuff that I never really wanted to share before. Really, some really dark areas, that arrests and all the stuff that happens with active addiction, and so stuff I just didn't really want to talk about. And near the end, I said, my hope is that I've shared my story, that you can reach out to me and share your story, and that has happened today. People have reached out to me and they talk to me about their vulnerability and and finally getting honest, and that's how our conversations start. So it's been fascinating, Liz, because it's the connections that I have today are just amazing since this book, and I continue to learn and educate and do my coaching stuff, and I do my podcast work and all this stuff. But it's been really thrilling. The reception of the book and what I hoped it would bring to other people and the awareness around it. So
Absolutely. You touched on something absolutely fantastic about telling your story, and that's a part of the recovery journey. It helps us to get out of the shame and out of the blame. It helps us to get out of the guilt. It helps us to just actually purge. And we talk about get trauma coming up and out. And when you write those stories, that is a good way for you to work through it. And you're hearing it in your own voice. You're writing it. You're getting rid of all the stuff, right? It's coming up and it's coming out. So I applaud you for not only telling your story, but also encouraging other people to tell theirs as well. I never thought that I would talk about any of the things that I uncovered in any of my books. I never thought that I would be on a podcast or even not hosting a podcast about trauma. No way. We were taught
yeah,
keep your stuff at home, keep your stuff in the house. But I say if you keep it in the house, it makes you sick.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. Definitely
Yeah.
agree with that. There's amazing things that come. I mean, just telling my story, it's been amazing. I didn't really, like I said, I didn't think the reception would be the way it was. It's because I was so afraid of sharing some of this information, but it was actually opposite. It was
Mm-hmm.
actually people said, wow, this guy could lay it out there. So why don't I reach out and talk? And that's the connections, not just not just the individual connections that we make from our own stories. It's the connections that we have with other groups that have gone through the same things that we've gone through, right? It's you mentioned some of those things earlier, right? But for me, it's opening the doors to different pathways where other groups can get involved and say, hey, they can put their hand up and say, hey, I've had enough. I want to talk about what's happened to me as well. And that's so important. So,
Absolutely. Generally, we ask the question, trauma, how has it empowered you? And you've kind of sprinkled that through, but if you can sum it up, how has trauma empowered and inspired you?
it's inspired me because it's given me the opportunity to kind of see where I'm at today. And it's given me the power to recognize some of the issues that have happened to me in my past and making those different behavior choices, right? That I don't have to suffer in silence anymore, that I understand some of these things that happened to me. I think one time that you mentioned the saying, we're not responsible for some of the trauma that happens to us, but we are responsible for making those changes and addressing that and moving in a different life. You're responsible for your life.
Yeah,
And I've been able to do that because I've been able to uncover some of these traumas that had happened in my life. And it's turned me into a different direction. And it's this time it's the right direction, you
I
know?
love that. I love that
Yeah.
when you say uncovered it, because that means that you weren't aware of it. And I think we're often not aware of how deep trauma affects our lives, our decisions. From the time we wake up in the morning, if that trauma is still sitting there unresolved, we're
Yeah.
making decisions behind that trauma glass wall or behind the trauma lens.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the other piece to this is that once you study it and you kind of, you understand it and you can see the behaviors around somebody and not just yourself with somebody else, you can be more empathetic towards some of those things, right? Yeah, I'm in a situation where I know somebody's like a people pleaser, right? It's fawning, right? And so I understand that background a little bit, and it helps me with my different relationships today because I can start
Absolutely.
to identify some of those things and just by their behavior, and then we can start having conversations around that, right? So to
Absolutely.
to to really open up, a true connection with somebody and help them to maybe address some of their past trauma, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
1,000%. And what would you tell someone that was suffering from or going through trauma right now, maybe not aware of it, but life is just not working out? What would you tell them?
Well, I mean, if life's not working out, I mean, that's a big question, right? But I think what we have to do is start to uncover, what their background is. Tell us about, their history of growing up, and once we start to identify those things that I've talked about, then we can just pose different questions to them. It's not saying, okay, we figured this out. It's more like a thing like, hey, maybe you want to try something like this. Maybe you want to try something like this. Maybe, your first reaction to things is always built up in anger, right? Maybe maybe there's some reasons why that, right? And if you start to talk to that individual, after a while, they start to recognize those things. It may not be at first, but if you can get somebody to recognize something, that's the first step. And then they
Absolutely.
can really, really like, okay, we could really grow on that. I mean, I have a lot of examples of that. Just like I said, somebody that's a people pleaser, you know, uh, probably in their life didn't get a lot of credit for things in their life, right? Or they never felt good in, whatever what they did. They had a parent or a guardian or whatever it was. They could never do whatever it was well enough, right? So
Yes.
what happens is they become people pleasers in their lives. And sometimes when they do that, they let people walk all over them, right? Because
Absolutely.
they want everything to be happy. And it doesn't work that way. But those are the things, Liz, that you were saying that once you identify that with that individual, they can start recognizing. And that is just a really cool thing because it
Yes.
really usually imposes a change for the better.
Absolutely. That is
Right.
absolutely incredible. Is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with today as we wrap up? This has been an amazing conversation. You've left a lot of great nuggets on the table.
No, no, I really appreciate it. I mean, the only thing that I would say is, if you're going through some of these things, there's help out there. There's, if you're struggling with, substance use disorder, there's a better life out there. There's a free life out there. Trust me, I've done every, thing that I tried to try to get sober, and now I live in the world of sobriety. But it's such a great life. It's such a great life to be connected and to have real people around you that really care and wants you to do better, and from my standpoint, from the book stand, if you're interested in hearing about my story, obviously Lost in London, a journey from insanity to acceptance is available on Amazon and Book Baby and a couple other publishers, but it's doing well in the marketplace, and I think you'll really like the story, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And I thank you so much for working with our male demographic. We really need more programs and more services in
Yeah.
that arena. So I thank you for being here today. I appreciate all the work that you do. Thank you for connecting with us. And we will see you next time. And everybody, bye for now. It's time to buckle up. No more suffering in silence. Our Power Pack journey to recovery and realignment starts now. Remember, you are collateral damage on someone else's warpath. Trauma is not your fault. Recovery, however, is your responsibility. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast.